Story: a poor mechanic built a custom wheelchair for paralyzed girl weeks. Later, jet landed outside. Harmony Creek was a town living in the past tense. It wasn't a place people moved to. It was a place they were from. Faded signs swung on rusted hinges, their promises of the juiciest steaks or the finest fabrics, now just peeling jokes told to the wind. The creek that gave the town its name had dwindled to a sluggish, muddy ribbon, and harmony was mostly found in the shared, unspoken agreement to leave each other be. At the edge of this quiet decay, where the cracked pavement of Main Street crumbled into a dirt road, stood Leo's garage. It wasn't a modern, sterile workshop with hydraulic lifts and computerized diagnostics. It was a cathedral of grease and steel, a place where the ghosts of 1,000 broken-down engines lingered in the air. Tools hung from the walls, not in perfect, sterile rows, but in a chaotic yet intuitive order that only their master understood. The scent of motor oil, hot metal, and old coffee was so deeply embedded in the wooden beams that it had become a permanent part of the structure itself. And in the center of this sanctuary stood Leo. To the people of Harmony Creek, Leo was a fixture, as reliable and silent as the old oak tree in the town square. He was a man in his early 30s, though the perpetual worry etched between his brows and the flecks of premature gray at his temples made him seem older. His hands were his testament. They were a roadmap of his life, calloused and scarred, with grease worked so deep into the lines of his palms that it would never wash out. But those hands moved with the grace of a surgeon. Right now, they were hovering over the exposed heart of a vintage Ford pickup, a relic that belonged to Old Man Hemlock. The engine had a cough, a rattling sickness deep in its chest, that 3 other mechanics in neighboring towns had declared fatal. Leo, however, heard something else. He heard a plea. His fingers, thick but surprisingly nimble, danced over the components. He didn't just see a timing belt. He saw the rhythmic pulse of a healthy engine. He didn't just feel a camshaft. He felt the engine's breath. He worked in a state of flow, a silent conversation between man and machine. He adjusted the valve clearance with a feather-light touch, his head cocked, listening, not just with his ears, but with the full length of his body, feeling the vibrations travel up through the soles of his worn leather boots. A final turn of a wrench, a gentle tap, and he straightened up. He wiped his hands on an already blackened rag, swung into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine, once rattling and sick, turned over with a deep, contented purr. It was the sound of a life saved, the sound of order restored. This was Leo's world. In the garage, everything had a solution. Every problem had a part. Every ailment a cure. He could diagnose, dismantle, and resurrect. Here, he was in control. The problem was the world outside the garage door. Old Man Hemlock arrived an hour later, shuffling in with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who measured his days by the sun. "Figured she was a goner, Leo," he rasped, his eyes fixed on the truck. Leo just nodded, wiping down a wrench that was already clean. "Loose rocker arm. Tapped it back into place. You're good to go." "Just like that?" Hemlock marveled. "The fella over in Ridgefield wanted to pull the whole block out. Said it'd cost me $2,000. "He was wrong," Leo said. His voice was low and gravelly from disuse, the kind of voice that seemed to cost him effort. He slid a smudged invoice across the cluttered countertop. The total was barely a tenth of the other quote. Hemlock squinted at the paper, then at Leo. "You're a good man, Leo. Too quiet for your own good, but a good man." He tried to engage further. "Town feels emptier every year, doesn't it? My granddaughter's talking about moving to the city. Says there's no future here." Leo's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. The word granddaughter hung in the air. He offered no response, just looked down at the wrench in his hands, his knuckles white. The silence stretched, becoming awkward. Hemlock cleared his throat, paid his bill in cash, and with a final, "Well, thanks again, son," he climbed into his resurrected truck and drove away, leaving Leo alone once more in his sanctuary. But the sanctuary had been breached. A ghost had slipped in with the old man's casual words. Leo leaned against the workbench, the smell of oil suddenly suffocating. He closed his eyes, and the ghost took shape. Her name was Lena, his sister. The memory wasn't a clear picture, but a collage of painful sensations. It was the high-pitched squeak of a wheel that always pulled to the left. It was the scent of the lavender soap she insisted on, a clean, bright smell that felt so out of place in their dusty house. It was the flash of a yellow ribbon in her hair, a defiant splash of color against a world she found so gray. And it was the feeling of her small hand in his, her fingers surprisingly strong, as he tried and failed to push her standard-issue, hospital-grade wheelchair over the bumpy patch of grass in their backyard. "Can we go to the woods, Leo?" Her voice echoed in his memory, full of a hope that broke his heart. "I want to see the creek up close." He had tried. He remembered the strain in his back, the wheels digging into the soft earth, the chair tipping precariously. He remembered the look on her face, not anger, but a quiet, soul-crushing disappointment. It was the look of a bird realizing its cage was smaller than it thought. He, the boy who could fix any bicycle chain and tune any lawnmower engine, couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. He couldn't give his sister the world she deserved. That memory was the engine of his own grief, and it had seized up years ago. He'd never been able to repair it. After she was gone, he had thrown himself into his work, building walls of steel and grease around his heart. In the garage, he was a master. Outside of it, he was just the boy who had failed his sister. Shaking his head to clear the images, Leo pushed himself off the bench and walked to the wide-open garage door, seeking fresh air. He squinted against the harsh afternoon sun, the world outside seeming too bright, too loud. And then he saw her. She was maybe 10 years old, sitting in a wheelchair at the edge of the road. But it wasn't her chair that he noticed first. It was her spirit. It radiated from her like heat from summer asphalt. She had a cascade of unruly brown hair and a smile that seemed to challenge the dreary town to a duel. Her head was tilted back, her face aimed at the sun, as if she were drinking in the light. Then, her focus shifted. A small, stubborn wildflower was growing through a crack in the pavement, a tiny speck of purple defiance. Her smile widened. She wanted it. Leo watched, his breath caught in his chest. He saw her maneuver the chair, a standard, clumsy model much like Lena's had been. The large back wheels struggled for purchase on the uneven ground. She leaned forward, her small arm outstretched, her fingers straining. The chair wobbled, its front caster catching in the crack. She was inches away, a universe away. He could see the flicker of frustration cross her face, the same shadow he'd seen on Lena's 1,000 times. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of fierce determination. She repositioned, tried again. It was in that moment that the ghost in his garage walked out into the sunlight. It was Lena's frustration, Lena's determination, Lena's confinement all playing out again right in front of him. The past wasn't past. It was here, living and breathing in a little girl with a sunbeam smile. The ache in his heart, the one he had numbed for years with oil and labor, flared into a sharp, stabbing pain. It was a pain so intense it felt like a physical blow. He was the fixer, the mechanic, the master of mending things. And right before him was the most broken thing he had ever seen, a vibrant spirit trapped in a failing machine. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to run out there, to fix it, to build something worthy of her spirit. But he was frozen, paralyzed by the memory of his own failure. The girl eventually gave up on the flower, sighing softly. A woman her mother, Leo, assumed came out of a nearby house and began pushing the chair down the sidewalk. The girl looked back at the wildflower one last time, a flicker of longing in her eyes, before disappearing around the corner. Leo stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. The sun beat down. The town remained silent. But for Leo, everything had changed. He slowly retreated into the shadows of his garage, the familiar scent of oil no longer a comfort. It was a reminder. The ghost was no longer just a memory. She had a name he didn't yet know, and a problem he suddenly, desperately, needed to solve. The sanctuary was no longer safe. It had become a workshop for a purpose he hadn't felt in a decade. The world inside house number 42 on Maple Lane was much smaller than the world outside, but infinitely brighter. It was a rented 2-bedroom bungalow that smelled of cinnamon toast and laundry detergent. Love was the primary decorator here. It was in the neat stack of books on the coffee table, the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the soft, worn quilt draped over the arm of the sofa. But signs of a quiet battle were everywhere, for those who knew where to look. The paint on the window frames was peeling, the kitchen linoleum was curled at the edges, and a stack of brown-windowed envelopes on the small entryway table seemed to sigh with a weight all their own. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dance between Sarah and Maya. It was a routine they had perfected over the past year, a choreography of necessity and affection. Sarah, her movements efficient yet gentle, was braiding Maya's unruly brown hair. Her own face was a portrait of soft strength, with kind eyes that held a permanent shadow of exhaustion. And then, Maya said, her voice full of dramatic flair, the dragon swooped down, but Sir Reginald wasn't scared. He held up his shield, which was secretly a giant cookie, and the dragon stopped right in his tracks. Sarah smiled, her fingers deftly weaving the final strands. A cookie shield? That's a new one. Did it work? Of course it worked. Who could be mad when they're offered a chocolate chip cookie? Maya reasoned, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She twisted in her chair to look up at her mother, her grin so wide it crinkled the corners of her eyes. Everybody loves cookies. That was Maya. In her world, problems weren't solved with swords and shields, but with cookies and kindness. Her spirit was a sunbeam cutting through the dustiest corners of their lives. A year ago, a slick road and a moment of screeching metal had taken her father from them and stolen the use of her legs. It had been a cataclysm that should have shattered their world into a million dark pieces. And some days, for Sarah, it felt like it had. But Maya refused to live in the dark. She simply found new ways to create light. Sarah finished the braid and secured it with a bright purple band, the same color as the wildflower Maya had spotted yesterday. There, perfect. Now breakfast. Then I've got that shipment manifest to finish before Miss Gable calls. Sarah worked from home as a freelance logistics coordinator, a job title that sounded far grander than it was. It meant long hours staring at spreadsheets, tracking shipments for a small company 100 miles away, all for a paycheck that barely covered the rent and Maya's mounting medical needs. She wheeled Maya to the small kitchen table, the chair's left wheel squeaking in that familiar, irritating way. It was a sound that grated on Sarah's last nerve, a constant reminder of everything that was just a little bit broken. As Maya happily munched on her toast, Sarah booted up her old laptop, wincing as it whirred and groaned to life. An email with a bold, red overdue in the subject line sat at the top of her inbox. It was from the physical therapy clinic. Her stomach tightened. She clicked it away, promising herself she'd deal with it later, a promise she made most days. Her gaze drifted to a framed photo on the wall. It was of her and her husband, David, taken on their wedding day. He had his arm wrapped around her, his smile wide and full of easy joy. He was a carpenter, a man who built beautiful things with his hands, a man her father had called a common laborer. The thought of her father was like touching a live wire. Arthur Thompson, a name that represented a different universe, a world of boardroom meetings, tailored suits, and cold, conditional love. She could still hear his voice from their last phone call, years before the accident. You are throwing your life away on this. This construction worker, Sarah. Don't come crying to me when your fairy tale falls apart. She hadn't cried to him, not when David had struggled to find work, not when Maya was born, and certainly not after the crash. Her pride was a fortress, built from the rubble of his disapproval. He had no idea he had a granddaughter. He had no idea she was paralyzed. He had made his choice, and she was determined to live with hers, even if it meant fighting a silent, exhausting war against a mountain of bills and a future that felt terrifyingly fragile. Mom, Maya's voice snapped her back to the present. Can I go draw outside? The sun is perfect today. Of course, sweetie. Just stay on the path, okay? The grass is still wet. Sarah watched from the window as Maya wheeled herself out the back door and onto the small, cracked concrete patio. Her prized possession sat on her lap, a large, wire-bound sketchbook and a tin of colored pencils. This was Maya's portal. If her chair was her cage, this book was her wings. Later that afternoon, after a tense call with Miss Gable about a missing crate of machine parts, Sarah went to check on Maya. She found her sitting under the shade of a small maple tree at the edge of their yard, deeply absorbed in her work. The sketchbook was open, displaying a breathtaking 2-page spread. It was a forest, but not just any forest. The trees had silver bark and leaves that shimmered with every color of the rainbow. A sparkling river, looking more like liquid starlight than water, flowed through the middle of the woods, and on the bank of the river was a girl in a wheelchair. But this chair was different. It had rugged, powerful wheels and looked like it could climb mountains. The girl in the drawing was leaning forward, her hand dipped into the magical water. That's beautiful, Maya, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Maya looked up, her eyes shining. This is the Whispering Woods. You can hear secrets in the leaves if you listen closely. And this, she said, tapping the drawing of the girl, is me. My chair is powered by moonbeams, so it can go anywhere. See? I'm about to touch the Starfall River. Sarah's heart ached with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride in her daughter's boundless imagination and sorrow for the reality that kept it confined to paper. Their own backyard was a world away from the Whispering Woods. It was a small, patchy lawn that sloped unevenly, bordered by a rickety fence. It was another reminder of their limitations. I think I'm going to add a unicorn, Maya declared. A baby one. She repositioned her chair to get a better angle, her wheels rolling off the concrete patio and onto the damp grass. And then, it happened. The front caster, the one that always gave them trouble, dug into a soft patch of earth. The chair lurched to a halt, sinking an inch into the mud. Maya tried to push the wheels, but they just spun uselessly, digging a deeper rut. Uh-oh, she said, her voice small. Mom, I'm stuck. Sarah's weariness evaporated, replaced by a familiar surge of protective adrenaline. It's okay, honey. Don't worry. We'll get you out. She went behind the chair and pulled. The wheels resisted, locked in the muddy suction. She gritted her teeth and pulled harder, her sneakers slipping on the wet grass. The chair barely budged. Frustration, hot and sharp, pricked at her. Why did everything have to be so hard? Why did a simple moment of joy in their own backyard have to turn into this struggle? It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to Maya, who asked for so little and deserved so much. Let's try rocking it, Sarah said, trying to keep the strain out of her voice. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. They pushed and pulled together. The chair groaned in protest. For a moment, it seemed to move, but then it settled back into the mud, even deeper this time. Maya looked down at the muddy wheel, her sunbeam smile finally dimming. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. That broke Sarah. It wasn't the stuck chair, or the mud, or the overdue bills. It was that whisper. It was her daughter apologizing for a limitation that was never her fault. No, baby, no, Sarah said, rushing to her front and kneeling in the damp grass, ignoring the mud staining her jeans. She wiped Maya's tear away with her thumb. You have nothing to be sorry for. Ever. It's this stupid chair, not you. It's the mud, not you. Okay? Maya nodded, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. They stayed there for a moment, a tiny island in a sea of small, everyday impossibilities. Finally, with a renewed, anger-fueled strength, Sarah managed to wrench the chair free, dragging it backward onto the solid ground of the patio, leaving a sad, muddy scar in the lawn. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Sarah sat in the quiet living room. The sketchbook lay on the coffee table, still open to the Whispering Woods. Her gaze fell on the muddy tire track Maya's chair had left on the kitchen floor, a dirty reminder of the afternoon struggle. She looked at the drawing of the fantasy wheelchair, the one powered by moonbeams that could go anywhere. It was just a child's drawing, an impossible dream. But as she sat there, wrapped in the heavy silence of the house, a desperate wish formed in her heart. She didn't need moonbeams or magic. She just needed someone who could see what she saw, a brilliant girl who deserved a chance to touch her own Starfall River, whatever and wherever that might be. She just needed a little bit of help. A wish she sent out into the quiet, unassuming night of Harmony Creek. For 2 days, the image of Maya's struggle was burned into Leo's mind. It played on a loop behind his eyes while he diagnosed a faulty alternator and replaced a worn-out clutch. He saw her determined little face, the strain in her arms, and the final, quiet slump of her shoulders when the wildflower remained just out of reach. The image wasn't just a memory. It was a problem, a complex mechanical failure he couldn't get out of his head. The system, a girl full of life paired with a machine full of limitations, was inefficient. It was broken. He found himself subtly altering his routine. He'd take his coffee breaks by the open garage door, his gaze drifting down the street toward house number 42. He didn't want to be seen. He was an observer, a diagnostician gathering data. He saw Sarah struggling to push the chair up the slight incline of a driveway. He saw Maya waiting on the sidewalk while her friends chased a ball into a grassy park. an invisible wall separating her from their game. Each observation was like another tick in a faulty engine, another piece of evidence confirming his diagnosis. The system was failing, and the sound of its failure was the squeak of that left wheel, a sound he could now pick out from half a block away. It was a cry for help that only he seemed to hear. The third day was a sweltering, humid afternoon where the air itself felt heavy. Leo was retorquing the lug nuts on a customer's sedan when he saw it. The defining event, the final catalyst. Maya was on the sidewalk in front of her house, her sketchbook open on her lap. A sudden gust of wind, a rogue breath in the still afternoon caught the corner of a page. It lifted the book, tossing it from her lap. It landed on the grass, a few feet away, lying open-faced on the ground. Leo saw the immediate panic on her face. Her sketchbook. Her wings. He watched her lean forward, her arm outstretched, her fingers waggling uselessly in the air. The book was too far. She looked around, but her mother was nowhere in sight. She took a breath and tried to propel her chair off the pavement onto the lawn. Leo's whole body tensed. He knew what would happen. The front casters hit the lip of the concrete and stopped dead. She tried again, with more force. The chair tilted precariously to the side, lifting one of its large wheels an inch off the ground. For a horrifying second, Leo thought it was going to tip completely. His feet moved before his brain gave the command. He took 2 quick strides out of his garage, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Help her. Just go help her. But he stopped, frozen on the edge of his property. He was a stranger, a quiet, grease-stained man the town mostly ignored. What if he scared her? What if her mother came out and thought he was some kind of creep? The ingrained habit of isolation, of non-interference, was a chain that pulled him back. He was a fixer of machines, not people. He stood there, helpless, as Maya, with a small cry of frustration, gave up. At that moment, Sarah came rushing out of the house, having seen the incident from the window. She quickly retrieved the sketchbook, brushed the grass from its pages, and gave Maya a reassuring hug. Leo watched the look on Maya's face as her mother handed the book back. It wasn't relief. It was a quiet, profound disappointment, not in her mother but in the situation, in the chair, in the few feet of grass that might as well have been a canyon. That look broke the chain. Leo retreated back into the cool darkness of his garage, the world outside fading away. The smell of oil and steel was no longer suffocating, it was clarifying. The problem was no longer just an observation, it was a mission. He walked past the half-repaired engine he'd been working on, his focus absolute. He strode to the far back corner of the garage, a space reserved for old parts, forgotten projects, and dust. Tucked under a heavy canvas tarp was a large, wooden trunk bound with leather straps. He hadn't opened it in almost 15 years. His hands hesitated for a moment before he wiped the grease from them with a rag and unbuckled the straps. The hinges creaked in protest as he lifted the lid. The air that escaped smelled of old paper and cedar, and something else. It smelled like memory. Inside, resting on a bed of his late mother's quilts, was a collection of meticulously organized treasures. There was Lena's favorite yellow ribbon, now faded to a pale lemon. There was a small, hand-carved wooden bird, a project he and his father had worked on the winter before he passed, and beneath it all was a stack of notebooks. The paper was yellowed with age, filled with the sprawling, imaginative handwriting of a child and the more precise, technical printing of a boy who was already thinking like an engineer. He pulled one out. On the cover, in Lena's bubbly script, it read, "The Go Anywhere Chair, Top Secret Plans." His breath hitched. He sank to the floor, leaning against a stack of old tires, and opened the book. The pages were filled with their shared dreams. There was Lena's drawing of a chair with rocket boosters and giant spring-loaded legs. Next to it was his own more practical, but no less ambitious sketch. It showed a chair with independent suspension, wide treaded tires, and a gear system adapted from a 10-speed bicycle. "It needs bigger wheels, Leo," he could hear her say, her voice as clear as if she were sitting next to him. "Like a monster truck, so it can go over rocks." "And a lower center of gravity," his younger self would have replied, already a budding mechanic, "so it won't tip over when you go fast." He traced the faded pencil lines with his calloused finger. This book held more than just drawings. It held the last pure, untainted piece of his childhood. It was a project born from love and a shared desire to conquer the limitations of Lena's world. They had planned to build it together one day, but they never got the chance. After she was gone, the grief was too heavy. He had packed their dreams away in this trunk and locked it, burying the key deep inside himself. For years, the memory of this chair had been a source of profound pain, a symbol of his failure. But now, looking at these plans through the lens of Maya's struggle, something shifted inside him. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a paralyzing anchor. It was becoming fuel. A spark ignited in the cold, dormant chambers of his heart. It was purpose. It was a clear, unshakable directive that cut through the fog of his grief. He would build this chair. He would build it for the little girl with the sunbeam smile and the unbreakable spirit. He would build it for the sister he couldn't save, to honor the dream they had shared. And he would build it for himself, to finally fix the most broken thing he knew. The decision settled over him, not with a crash, but with a profound, resonant calm. The quiet ache in his chest didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the hollow ache of loss. It was the focused, humming energy of a motor about to engage. He carefully placed the notebook on his main workbench, clearing a space for it amidst the clutter, treating it with the reverence of a sacred text. He stood there for a long moment, the garage silent around him. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was an architect of freedom. His first move was to pull a large, clean sheet of heavy-duty paper onto his drafting table, a surface that had been used mostly for calculating invoices for years. He took a graphite pencil and began to sketch. His movements were fluid and certain. He started with Lena's monster truck wheels, refining them, adapting the design for a lighter frame. He incorporated his own youthful ideas about suspension, adding concepts he'd learned from working on ATVs and dirt bikes. He sketched late into the night, the single bare bulb above the table, casting a golden halo around him. The sounds of the sleeping town faded away, replaced by the soft scratch of pencil on paper. He was no longer just Leo, the quiet mechanic from Harmony Creek. He was Leo, the boy who promised his sister the woods, and this time, he was going to keep his promise. The dawn that followed Leo's decision was different. It wasn't the start of just another day of oil changes and tire rotations. It was the beginning of a mission. The purpose that had sparked to life within him now burned with a steady, intense flame, pushing back the shadows that had occupied his heart for so long. His first act of the day wasn't to brew his usual pot of tar-black coffee, but to walk to the small, dusty office in the back of the garage. He pulled out a metal lockbox from a filing cabinet, a place where he stored the meager profits from his work. He emptied the entire contents, a collection of worn bills and rolled coins, onto his desk. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was his entire investment in this new, silent promise. His next stop was the Harmony Creek scrapyard, a sprawling, chaotic landscape of rusted metal and forgotten machinery on the edge of town. To most, it was a graveyard. To Leo, it was a library of possibilities. He moved through the metallic skeletons with the practiced eye of a predator, his gaze sweeping over piles of discarded metal, looking past the rust and decay to see the potential within. He wasn't looking for shiny new parts. He was looking for character, for strength. He found the lightweight yet sturdy frame of a discarded mountain bike, its advanced aluminum alloy perfect for the core structure. He salvaged a pair of shock absorbers from a defunct all-terrain vehicle, seeing in them the heart of a suspension system that could swallow bumps and cracks whole. He found a sheet of diamond plate steel, dented but structurally sound, that would make a perfect, rugged footrest. Each piece he selected was a verse in a poem only he could read. The real work began that night. After his last customer departed, Leo locked the large garage doors, shutting out the world. He flicked on the powerful overhead work lights, and the space transformed from a simple repair shop into a creator's workshop. He laid his new treasures and his old dreams, the scrapyard parts, and Lena's notebook side by side on his workbench. The first step was deconstruction. With the hiss of a cutting torch and the scream of an angle grinder, he began to break down his found objects into their raw components. Sparks showered the concrete floor, illuminating his face, which was hidden behind a dark welding mask. He was a silhouette moving through a storm of fire, dismantling the past to build a new future. The process was slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. It became a ritual, a conversation with the ghosts of his past. Each part of the chair he fabricated was inextricably linked to a memory of Lena, and the work became a way to finally process the grief he had suppressed for so long. While painstakingly welding the aluminum tubes to form the main chassis, he remembered Lena, small and frail, struggling to lift her own heavy, cumbersome chair over the threshold of their front door. The memory spurred him on, his welds becoming cleaner, stronger, determined to make his creation as light and responsive as possible. He wasn't just joining metal, he was fighting back against the dead weight of his sister's frustration. Days bled into nights. Leo's world shrank to the four walls of his garage. He worked with a singular focus, his own needs becoming secondary. Meals were forgotten, or consisted of stale crackers eaten while studying his designs. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts on an old cot in the office, his dreams filled with schematics and the faint echo of Lena's laughter. The most challenging part was the suspension. His design was ambitious, calling for each of the four wheels to react independently to the terrain. It required complex joints and precise calibration. As he struggled to fit a custom machine bracket, his wrench slipped, and he smashed his knuckle against the frame. A sharp, hot pain shot up his arm. He swore under his breath and pulled off his glove, looking at the bloody gash. And in that moment of pain and frustration, a vivid memory surfaced. He was 14, and Lena had been having a particularly bad day. Her standard-issue chair, with its rigid frame, had gotten stuck on an exposed tree root during a family picnic. He remembered the jarring stop, the jolt that ran through her small body. He remembered her face, crumpled in a silent cry of pain, not from injury, but from sheer, infuriating helplessness. He had felt so powerless then, so full of a rage he couldn't direct anywhere. Now, that rage had a purpose. He looked from his bleeding knuckle to the half-finished suspension assembly. He wrapped his hand in a clean rag, picked up his wrench, and went back to work. This time, there was no hesitation. The bracket slid into place. The joint moved smoothly. He was fixing more than a machine. He was building a response to a 15-year-old memory. He was building the solution he couldn't provide as a boy. The creation of the seat was the most tender part of the process. He remembered the pressure sores Lena used to get from the unforgiving vinyl of her own chair. He refused to let that happen this time. He used his own money, the money he had been saving for a new welding unit, to buy a high-density foam block and a swath of durable, waterproof canvas. He spent an entire day carving the foam, molding it with his hands, creating an ergonomic shape that would support and comfort, not just contain. He thought of Maya's bright, energetic form, and he shaped the seat to cradle her, not confine her. As he stretched and stitched the canvas over the foam, his hands, usually so accustomed to the unyielding nature of metal, moved with a surprising gentleness. He was weaving his silent apology to Lena into every seam. Finally came the wheels. In Lena's notebook, she had drawn them like monster truck tires, covered in fierce-looking spikes. Leo smiled at the memory. He couldn't build monster truck tires, but he could honor the spirit of her design. He found a set of wide, knobby tires from a professional downhill mountain bike. He reinforced the rims and engineered a simple but effective gearing system, operated by a hand crank near the armrest. It would allow Maya to switch between a high gear for smooth surfaces and a low-torque gear for tough terrain for climbing over rocks, just as Lena had wanted. After 3 weeks of relentless work, it was finished. It stood in the center of the garage, bathed in the glow of the single work light. It looked nothing like a standard wheelchair. It was a machine, rugged and honest, its form dictated entirely by its function. The unpainted aluminum frame gleamed, the clean lines of the welds a testament to the hours of labor. The independent suspension gave it an aggressive, ready-for-anything stance. The knobby tires promised adventure. It wasn't shiny or polished. It was raw. It was a collage of found objects and forgotten dreams, forged in memory and welded together with purpose. It was, Leo thought, the most honest thing he had ever built. He ran his hand over the smooth canvas of the seat, then gave one of the wheels a gentle spin. It rotated smoothly, silently. The squeak was gone. Exhaustion finally hit him, a wave that made his knees feel weak. He sank onto a nearby stool, his gaze fixed on his creation. The garage was a mess, littered with metal shavings, discarded parts, and empty coffee cups. He was thinner, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes held a light that hadn't been there a month ago. The ghost of Lena was still there, but she wasn't a haunting presence anymore. She was a quiet, approving smile in the corner of the room. He had done it. He had taken the fragments of his grief and built something whole. He had built a chariot, not for a princess in a fairy tale, but for a real-life warrior with a sunbeam smile. And now, all that was left was to give it to her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in years, Leo was about to step out of the sanctuary of his garage, not as a mechanic, but as the bearer of a gift of freedom he wasn't sure he was worthy of giving. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of a clear day. For Leo, it felt charged with a nervous energy that was entirely unfamiliar. For 3 weeks, the world outside his garage had barely existed. Now he had to re-enter it, not just as himself, but as the creator of the strange, rugged machine that stood beside him. He had spent an hour that morning just looking at it, his stomach churning. What if they thought he was crazy? What if they were offended? The thought of their rejection was a cold knot of fear in his gut. But then he pictured Maya's face, her frustration at being stopped by a few inches of grass. That image was stronger than his fear. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans. Jeans that were, for once, clean and not stained with grease. He had even put on a new shirt. It felt like a costume. With a final glance around his workshop, he gripped the handles of the chair and pushed it out of the shadows of the garage and into the bright morning sun. Rolling it down the street felt like a parade of one. The chair moved silently, its knobby tires gliding over the pavement. It felt alive under his hands. Mrs. Gable, the town's resident gossip, was watering her petunias and stopped mid-sprinkle, her mouth falling slightly agape at the sight of the strange contraption. Leo kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his knuckles white on the handles. His destination was only a block away, but it felt like miles. He stopped in front of house number 42. The little bungalow seemed to watch him, its windows like questioning eyes. The fear returned, sharp and insistent. He could still turn back, roll the chair back into the garage and pretend this never happened. But the scar in the lawn where Maya's old chair had gotten stuck was still visible. It was a small, muddy patch of earth that held him in place. He raised his hand and knocked on the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. The door opened, and Sarah stood there. She was holding a coffee mug, and her expression shifted in a split second from mild curiosity to guarded suspicion. Her eyes flicked from Leo's nervous face down to the bizarre-looking machine he was holding, and then back up. Her brow furrowed. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm. It was the voice of a mother bear protecting her cub. Leo's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated from his mind. Words, always so difficult for him, failed him completely. He opened his mouth, but only a dry croak came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. I'm Leo. From the garage down the street, he managed, the words feeling clumsy and thick in his mouth. I built this. He gestured awkwardly at the chair. For your daughter. Sarah's suspicion deepened. A strange man she barely knew had built a custom wheelchair for her daughter. Alarm bells started ringing in her head. For Maya? Why? I saw, he started struggling to explain. I saw her getting stuck. The old chair. It's not right. For her. He felt his face flush, certain he was making a mess of this. He was a mechanic. He should have brought a manual. Before Sarah could formulate a response, a small voice came from behind her. Mom? Who is it? Maya appeared, wheeling her old chair into the doorway. She stopped short when she saw Leo's creation. And in that moment, the entire dynamic of the scene shifted. Maya didn't see a strange man or a pile of scrap metal. Her eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated wonder, took in every detail. She saw the big, powerful wheels. She saw the sturdy, angled frame that looked like it belonged on a moon rover. She saw the intricate suspension springs coiled and ready for action. She didn't see a wheelchair. She saw a chariot. She saw an adventure machine. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. It was the sunbeam smile, and it was aimed directly at the chair. It was a look of instant recognition, as if a dream she didn't even know she had had just rolled up to her front door. Whoa, she breathed, the single word filled with more awe and understanding than Leo could have ever hoped for. Maya's reaction was a wave of warmth that washed over Leo, melting the knot of fear in his stomach. It also melted Sarah's skepticism. Seeing the pure, unfiltered joy on her daughter's face, she looked at Leo again, this time with new eyes. She saw the exhaustion etched on his face, the nervous hope in his expression, and the grease still faintly ingrained in his hands despite his efforts to clean them. This wasn't a crazy person. This was kindness. A kind of radical, unexpected kindness she didn't know existed anymore. "Can I?" Maya asked, looking at her mother, her eyes pleading. Sarah hesitated for only a second before nodding, a lump forming in her throat. Leo gently rolled the new chair forward. He knelt, his movements careful and practiced as he explained the features to Maya, his voice finding its confidence now that he was talking about mechanics. "The brakes are here, just like a bicycle. This lever," he said, pointing to the hand crank, "changes the gear. Push it forward for flat ground, for speed. Pull it back when the ground gets rough. It'll give you more power, so it's easier to push." He pointed to the springs. "And this will make the bumps feel smaller." Transferring Maya from the old chair to the new one was a moment of supreme vulnerability. Sarah helped, and as Maya settled into the custom-molded seat, she let out a little gasp. "It's comfy," she declared. "It feels like it's hugging me." Leo felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had gotten the seat right. For a moment, Maya just sat there, her hands on the rugged push rims, feeling the raw potential beneath her fingertips. Then, with a determined look, she pushed. The chair shot forward with an ease that surprised her. It was so responsive, so light. She did a quick, silent loop on the concrete patio, her movements fluid and confident. A peal of delighted laughter escaped her lips, a sound of pure, crystalline joy that echoed in the morning air. It was the most beautiful sound Leo had ever heard. "Mom, look," she cried. And then she did it. She aimed the chair directly at the edge of the patio, at the border between the smooth concrete and the bumpy lawn. It was the barrier that had defeated her so many times before. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pushed hard. Instead of the jarring stop of her old chair, the new one met the challenge head-on. The front wheels, guided by their suspension, lifted slightly, met the grass, and rolled over it without a hitch. The back wheels followed, the shock absorbers compressing and decompressing, smoothing out the uneven ground. Maya was on the grass. She was on the other side. She let out a whoop of triumph, a wild, joyful sound. She was free. She pushed forward, faster now, the knobby tires gripping the lawn, leaving clean, decisive tracks where her old chair had left only a muddy scar of failure. She navigated around the small maple tree, her laughter ringing out across the quiet neighborhood. She was no longer a girl in a wheelchair. She was a pilot. She was an explorer. Sarah stood on the patio, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. They weren't tears of sorrow or exhaustion. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. She was watching her daughter reclaim a piece of her childhood that she thought was lost forever. She turned to Leo, who was standing back, watching the scene with a quiet, shaky smile on his face. He looked like a man who had just watched his invention take flight. I don't know what to say," Sarah managed, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you isn't a big enough word. How can I ever?" "You don't have to," Leo said, his voice soft. He couldn't take his eyes off Maya, who was now examining a beetle on a blade of grass, something she could have never gotten close enough to see before. Seeing that's payment enough. He had spent 3 weeks in his garage, pouring his grief and his regret into a machine made of scrap metal. He had hoped, at best, to make a little girl's life a bit easier. He had never imagined he would be giving her back a piece of her world. He had never imagined that the sound of her laughter would be the thing that finally, truly, began to mend his own broken heart. The gift of the chair was not an ending. It was a beginning. It marked the start of a new season in Harmony Creek, one measured not by the turning of leaves, but by the near-constant, joyful hum of Maya's new wheels on the pavement. A new routine, as heartwarming as it was unexpected, began to form. It started with Maya wanting to understand her new chariot. The day after receiving it, she appeared at the wide-open entrance of Leo's garage, her expression a mixture of curiosity and reverence. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Leo emerged from beneath the hood of a car, wiping his hands on a rag. He was surprised to see her, a jolt of his old shyness returning. But Maya's smile was disarming. "I came to say thank you again," she said. "And I was wondering how the gears work. The lever thingy." A slow smile touched Leo's lips. It was a question about mechanics, a language he understood perfectly. "Come on in," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Just watch out for the oil spill near the blue car." That first visit turned into a ritual. Nearly every day after finishing her schoolwork, Maya would make the short journey to the garage. The space that had once been Leo's solitary sanctuary slowly transformed. Her presence was a splash of bright color in his world of monochrome grease and steel. She would park her chair near his workbench, her sketchbook open on her lap, and pepper him with questions while he worked. "What's that spinny thing?" she'd ask, pointing at a fan belt. "Why does oil get all black and yucky? If you could build a car out of anything, what would you use?" "I'd use gingerbread. For the snacks." And Ray. Leo, a man who sometimes went an entire day speaking fewer than a dozen words, found himself talking more than he had in years. He explained the principles of internal combustion using nuts and bolts to represent pistons and valves. He taught her the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. He showed her the precise art of tightening a bolt, not too loose, not too tight. He spoke of engines and axles with a quiet passion she instinctively understood. It was the same passion she had for her colored pencils. They were both makers, just in different mediums. In return, Maya filled his quiet, orderly world with chaos and imagination. She told him epic tales of Sir Reginald and the Cookie Shield. She showed him her drawings of far-off galaxies and underwater kingdoms. She brought a lightness into the garage that scattered the dusty ghosts in the corners. The quiet hum of his workshop was now frequently punctuated by her bright, infectious laughter. One particularly warm afternoon, she looked up from her drawing and said, "You know that place in my sketchbook? The Whispering Woods?" Leo nodded, remembering the drawing Sarah had described to him. "I was thinking," Maya continued, a thoughtful look on her face, "that maybe there's a real Whispering Woods, not with rainbow leaves maybe, but close." Leo stopped what he was doing, a half-repaired carburetor in his hand. He looked at Maya, then at her chair. An idea took root. "Finish that drawing," he said. "I'll close up shop a little early today." An hour later, they were on a little-known dirt trail just outside of town, a path that led toward the thicker woods surrounding the creek. It was a place Leo hadn't visited since he was a boy. The path was uneven, littered with rocks and roots, a territory that would have been completely impassable for Maya's old chair. But the new chair, her chair, handled it with ease. Maya learned to shift the gears, her brow furrowed in concentration as she put more torque to the wheels to climb over a series of exposed roots. Leo walked beside her, not helping, just watching, ready to offer advice if needed. But she didn't need it. She was a natural, her movements becoming more fluid and confident with every obstacle she conquered. They reached a clearing where the trees grew thick and tall. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above them, creating a soft, whispering sound that filled the air. Maya stopped and tilted her head back, a look of pure bliss on her face. "Leo," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Listen, it's the Whispering Woods." Ends 20. They sat there for a long time, in comfortable silence, listening to the secrets of the leaves. In that moment, Leo wasn't a reclusive mechanic haunted by his past, and Maya wasn't a girl defined by her limitations. They were just two friends, two explorers, sharing a quiet discovery. He was showing her the world, and she was showing him how to live in it again. Their friendship didn't go unnoticed. The people of Harmony Creek, accustomed to the predictability of their small town, began to talk. Old Man Hemlock saw Leo smiling a genuine, unforced smile as he helped Maya adjust her footplate. "Miss." Gable saw them sharing a soda on the bench outside the garage, Leo listening intently as Maya chattered away. The reclusive mechanic was different. He was lighter. And the girl who had been a quiet, almost tragic figure was now a blur of motion and joy, her triumphant laughter becoming a new, beloved part of the town's soundscape. The story of the strange, homemade wheelchair and the unlikely friendship it fostered became local folklore. It was this folklore that reached the ears of Ben Carter. Ben was a young, ambitious reporter for the Tri-County Ledger, an online news blog that served a handful of sleepy rural towns. He was perpetually on the hunt for a good human interest story, something that could break through the monotony of town council meetings and bake sale announcements. When he heard the whispers about the mechanic and the little girl, His journalistic senses tingled. He found Sarah one afternoon as she was leaving the local grocery store. He introduced himself, his demeanor earnest and respectful. "I know this might sound odd," he began, "but I've been hearing an amazing story about your daughter and a custom wheelchair. I write for the Ledger, and I think it's the kind of uplifting story people need right now." Sarah was hesitant at first, her protective instincts on high alert, but Ben was gentle and sincere. He wasn't interested in tragedy, he was interested in hope. She agreed, thinking of Leo and the incredible, selfless gift he had given them. He deserved to be celebrated, even if he would hate the attention. A few days later, Ben came to their house with a small camera. He interviewed Sarah, who spoke with heartfelt emotion about their struggles and the profound impact of Leo's kindness. He then spoke to Maya. He didn't ask about the accident or what she couldn't do. He asked her about her chair. "It's not a chair," Maya corrected him politely. "It's the Trailblazer 5000. She proceeded to give him a full tour, demonstrating the gears, bouncing on the suspension, and explaining how it could conquer any mountain. Ben filmed her as she navigated her backyard with the skill of a professional stunt driver, her face alight with pure joy. Ben's last stop was Leo's garage. Leo was deeply uncomfortable with the camera and the questions, answering in clipped, one-word sentences. But when Ben asked him why he built it, Leo's guarded exterior cracked for a moment. He looked over at the corner of his workshop where Lena's notebook still lay open. "There was a problem," Leo said simply, his voice thick with unspoken meaning. "So I fixed it." Ben Carter may have been a small-town reporter, but he knew he had something special. He went back to his office and wove the interviews and footage together. He wrote with a simplicity and sincerity that honored the heart of the story. He didn't over-dramatize it. He let Maya's laughter and Leo's quiet integrity speak for themselves. He titled the short article and its accompanying 2-minute video, "The Mechanic of Harmony Creek and His Chariot of Hope." He posted it on the Ledger's website and shared it on their social media page. He hoped it might get a few hundred views from locals and maybe brighten a few people's day. He had no idea that he had just lit a fuse. He had taken a quiet act of kindness, born in a dusty garage in a forgotten town, and released it into the world. And it was about to travel much further and much faster than he could ever have imagined. Hundreds of miles away from the quiet whispers of Harmony Creek, the world roared. It was the roar of commerce, of ambition, of relentless forward momentum. And at the epicenter of that roar sat Arthur Thompson in a corner office on the 54th floor of a gleaming skyscraper made of glass and steel. His world was one of polished mahogany, hushed phone calls, and stock prices that flickered green and red on a bank of monitors. It was a world he had built with his own 2 hands, a fortress of wealth and power designed to insulate him from the messiness of life. Arthur was in his early 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His suits were exquisitely tailored, his shoes shined to a mirror finish. He was a man accustomed to control, a man who believed that every problem had a price and every person a weakness. He commanded boardrooms with an iron will, his voice a low, confident rumble that could make grown men tremble. But inside the silent, opulent fortress he had built, Arthur Thompson was profoundly, desperately lonely. His day was a metronome of scheduled power. 9 a.m., hostile takeover strategy session. 10:30 a.m., quarterly earnings call. 12 p.m., a joyless lunch of seared tuna and arugula eaten at his desk. He moved through his life with the ruthless efficiency of one of his own factory lines. But in the quiet moments in the back of his chauffeured car, or late at night in his sterile, echoing penthouse, the silence was deafening. It was in these moments that the ghost of his own making would visit him. The ghost was his daughter, Sarah. He remembered her as a girl with bright, defiant eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. He had loved her with a fierce, possessive pride. He had plans for her, the best schools, a strategic marriage, a place for her in his empire. But she had defied him. She had fallen in love with a carpenter, a man with dirt under his fingernails and dreams that didn't involve stock options. Arthur had seen it as the ultimate betrayal. He saw the man's love not as a gift to his daughter, but as a theft of his own legacy. Their final conversation was a scar on his memory. He had called her choice foolish, her love a childish fantasy. He had told her she was throwing her life away. The words he used had been weapons, designed to hurt, to bring her back in line. Don't come crying to me when your fairy tale falls apart, he had snarled, the final devastating blow. Don't worry, she had replied, her voice trembling but unbroken. I won't, and she hadn't. The silence that followed that call had stretched from days into years. His pride, a stubborn, unyielding mountain, had forbidden him from being the one to break it. He told himself it was her lesson to learn. But as the years passed, the silence began to feel less like a victory and more like a self-inflicted wound. He had won the battle but lost the entire world. It was 2:15 p.m. His executive assistant, a young, impeccably dressed woman named Chloe, entered his office, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Sir, she said, her voice polished and professional, the preliminary reports from the Singapore merger are on your desk. And also, this. She placed a tablet on the mahogany expanse in front of him. The head of the Thompson Foundation sent it over. It's a human interest story from a local blog. It's starting to get some traction online. They thought it might be a potential candidate for a grant, a PR opportunity. Arthur grunted, his eyes not leaving the Singapore reports. PR? We don't need PR. We need profits. What is it? It's about a mechanic in a small town who built a custom wheelchair for a disabled girl, Chloe explained. Arthur barely registered the words. He was about to dismiss her, to tell her to file it away with 100 other funding requests they received each week. But something made him pause. He glanced at the tablet. The screen showed a still image from a video. It was a girl with a cascade of unruly brown hair, sitting in a rugged, strange-looking machine. She was laughing, her face tilted toward the sun. There was something familiar in the shape of her smile, a faint echo of a laugh he hadn't heard in a decade. Curiosity, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, pricked at him. He tapped the play button. The video began. It was shaky, amateurish, but it had a raw power that transcended its low production quality. He saw the girl, Maya, expertly maneuvering the chair. He heard her mother, Sarah, speaking. And then the camera focused on Sarah's face as she spoke to the reporter. Arthur's world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from his lungs. The polished office, the stock tickers, the Singapore reports had all dissolved. The only thing that existed was his daughter's face on the screen. She looked older, tired, but the same defiant strength was in her eyes. His hand trembled as he reached for the volume control. After the accident, Sarah was saying, her voice thick with emotion, life was difficult. David was gone. And Maya, the accident. David was gone. The words hit Arthur like physical blows. The carpenter, dead. His daughter, a widow. He felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. The video cut to the girl, Maya, his granddaughter. A granddaughter he never knew he had. She was talking about her chair, the Trailblazer 5000. Her spirit was a supernova, bright and fierce and utterly captivating. He saw Sarah's love in her, but he saw David's joy too. And beneath it all, he saw a glimmer of himself, a stubborn, unyielding determination. The 2-minute video ended. The screen went black. But the roar in Arthur's ears was no longer the sound of the city. It was the sound of his own heart, pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. The fortress he had built around himself crumbled to dust in an instant, leaving him exposed, shivering in the ruins of his own pride. He had spent years telling himself that he was right, that he was the wrong party. But looking at the face of the granddaughter he had never met, a girl who had suffered a tragedy he couldn't even imagine, he understood the devastating truth. He hadn't been right, he had been a fool. A cruel, lonely, pathetic old fool. The regret was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He thought of all the years he had missed. First steps, birthdays, bedtime stories. He had traded it all for a mountain of money and a throne of solitude. Sir? Mr. Thompson? Are you all right? Chloe's voice pulled him back. Arthur looked up, his face ashen. The granite mask was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. His eyes were wide with a panic she had never seen before. Get my pilot on the line, he commanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. Now, and your 4 p.m. with the board? Cancel it, he snapped, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority, but it was a desperate, brittle sound now. Cancel everything. Find out where this was filmed. Harmony Creek. Find it. I want the jet ready in an hour. Chloe stared, stunned into silence for a moment before nodding and rushing out of the office. Arthur stood and walked to the vast window that overlooked the city, his kingdom. He didn't see the power or the prestige. He saw a gilded cage he had built for himself. He didn't know what he would say to Sarah. "I'm sorry," felt like a pebble tossed into the Grand Canyon. He didn't know if she would slam the door in his face. He deserved it if she did. But he knew with a certainty that eclipsed every business decision he had ever made that he had to try, he had to go. An hour later, the sound of a Gulfstream jet's engines spooled to life, a metallic scream that tore through the afternoon sky. For the residents of Harmony Creek, it was a sound from another world, a roar that ripped through the quiet fabric of their town. It was the sound of a past that had been buried for a decade, now roaring back to life, descending from the sky on wings of polished steel and desperate regret. The jet touched down on the cracked, weed-choked tarmac of the Harmony Creek airstrip with a jarring bump that felt entirely appropriate to Arthur. This was not his world of smooth landings and seamless transitions. This was a place of rough edges and forgotten things, a place where he was the alien, the intruder. The moment the cabin door opened, the air that hit him was different thick, with the smell of damp earth, cut grass, and his own profound fear. He had rented a car, a bland, anonymous sedan that was waiting for him on the edge of the airfield. Driving through the quiet, fading streets of Harmony Creek was a surreal experience. It was a world away from the chrome and glass canyons he navigated every day. People on the sidewalks stopped and stared at the unfamiliar car, their curiosity piqued. Arthur felt like he was in a foreign country without a map, and in a way, he was. The directions his assistant had printed out felt useless. The real journey was through a minefield of his own making. He found Maple Lane easily. He parked the car half a block away from house number 42, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat there for a full 5 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel, the engine still running. He could still turn around. He could fly back to his silent penthouse, bury this discovery under a mountain of work, and pretend he'd never seen the video. Pride, that old and stubborn companion, whispered that it was the safer path. But then he pictured Maya's laugh. He pictured the exhaustion in Sarah's eyes. He turned off the engine. Walking up the cracked concrete path to the small bungalow was the longest walk of his life. Every detail seemed magnified. The peeling paint on the railing, the slightly crooked screen door, a child's colorful pinwheel spinning lazily in a pot of flowers. These were the details of the life his daughter had chosen, the life he had so arrogantly condemned. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. The sound was hollow, pathetic. The door opened, and Sarah stood there. For a split second, there was only confusion on her face. Then, as recognition dawned, her expression went through a rapid, violent series of transformations. Shock, disbelief, and then a cold, hard anger that was like a physical wall slamming up between them. Her body tensed, her stance becoming instantly, fiercely protective. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, each word a shard of ice. Arthur's carefully prepared apologies, the lines he had rehearsed on the plane, vanished. Standing before his daughter, seeing the raw, 10-year-old wound in her eyes, he was stripped of all his corporate rhetoric. "Sarah," he began, his own voice a stranger's, hoarse and unfamiliar. I saw a video about the girl." He couldn't bring himself to say my granddaughter. He hadn't earned that right. "You saw a video," Sarah repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief and scorn. "And that's why you're here? A little PR opportunity for the great Arthur Thompson?" "No," he said, shaking his head, feeling a desperate panic rising. "No, it wasn't like that. I didn't know, Sarah. I didn't know about your husband, about her." "Of course you didn't know," she shot back, her voice gaining a bitter strength. "You made it very clear you wanted to know nothing about my life. My fairy tale, I believe you called it. Well, here it is. Is it everything you expected?" The bitterness in her voice was a dagger, and it twisted in his gut. He deserved every bit of it. All the power and influence he wielded in his world meant nothing here. Here, he was just a man who had broken his daughter's heart. "I was wrong," he said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "Everything I said, Everything I did, it was wrong. I was a fool. You were, she agreed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, an unbreachable fortress, and a decade too late. The conversation was a stalemate. He was drowning, and she was refusing to throw him a rope. He couldn't blame her. He had been the one to set their ship on fire. It was in that moment of hopeless deadlock that a new sound entered the tense standoff, the soft whir of wheels on a wooden floor. Mom, who's at the door? Maya appeared in the hallway behind Sarah, maneuvering her Trailblazer 5000 with practiced ease. She rolled to a stop beside her mother, her bright, curious eyes taking in the tall, silver-haired stranger on her doorstep. She saw the expensive suit and the shiny shoes, but mostly she saw the look on his face. It was a look she recognized, though she had never seen it on someone so old. It was the look she sometimes had when she couldn't quite reach something, a look of frustration and deep, deep sadness. Sarah instinctively put a protective hand on Maya's shoulder, trying to shield her. It's no one, sweetie. Go back to your room. But Maya didn't move. She wasn't afraid. Fear was a foreign concept when she was in her chariot. The chair had given her more than mobility. It had given her a quiet, unshakable confidence. She looked past her mother's protective arm and directly at the stranger. Her gaze was clear and steady. Arthur looked at his granddaughter. Truly looked at her for the first time. She was the perfect fusion of the two people he had torn apart. She had Sarah's defiant eyes and the ghost of David's easy smile. He saw a universe of lost time in her face, a galaxy of birthdays and scraped knees and bedtime stories he had forfeited. The sheer magnitude of his loss washed over him, and his carefully constructed composure finally shattered. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. Maya saw the tears welling in the old man's eyes. She saw his shoulders slump in defeat, and in that moment she did not see a powerful man, or a threat, or even a stranger. She saw someone who was hurting. With a gentle push of her wheels, she navigated around her mother, bridging the space between them. She rolled to a stop just a few feet from Arthur, tilting her head with the innocent, direct curiosity of a child. "Are you sad?" she asked. The question was so simple, so pure, so utterly devoid of anger or accusation. It wasn't a weapon. It was an olive branch. It sliced through decades of pride and anger and regret, straight to the core of Arthur's being. He had been prepared for yelling, for recriminations, for a door slammed in his face. He had not been prepared for this. He had not been prepared for the disarming power of a child's empathy. The question broke him. A sob escaped his lips, a raw, ragged sound that came from a place of deep, ancient grief. The tears he had held back now flowed freely, streaming down his weathered cheeks. He sank to his knees on the welcome mat, a king abdicating his throne of pride, his tall frame crumpling until he was at eye level with the granddaughter he had never met. "Yes," he choked out, the word barely a whisper. "Yes, I am so, so sad." He looked from Maya's clear eyes to Sarah's stunned face. The anger in Sarah's expression was faltering, replaced by a confused, painful softening. She was seeing what Maya saw, not the corporate tyrant who had disowned her, but a broken old man kneeling on her doorstep, weeping. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Arthur said, his voice cracking, looking at his daughter. "For everything. For David. For not being here. For being a proud, stupid man who chose being right over being a father. I'm so sorry." Maya watched the exchange, her expression serious. Then she did something extraordinary. She reached out her small hand and gently placed it on Arthur's trembling arm. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was forgiveness. It was a welcome. Sarah watched her daughter offer the comfort she herself was not yet ready to give. She saw the genuine, soul-deep agony on her father's face. The fortress around her heart, which had stood unbreached for 10 years, began to crumble. It didn't fall all at once. But a single, crucial brick had been dislodged by the small hand of a 10-year-old girl in a remarkable chair. "You should come inside," Sarah said, her voice quiet and unsteady. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a happy ending. But it wasn't a slammed door. It was a beginning. A fragile, tear-stained bridge, built by the fearless heart of a little girl. The atmosphere inside the small bungalow was thick with the weight of unspoken words and years of silence. Arthur sat stiffly on the edge of the worn sofa, a throne of chintz fabric that felt more intimidating than his own leather chair on the 54th floor. He looked utterly out of place, a hawk in a canary's cage. Sarah made coffee, her movements precise and automatic, a way to occupy her hands while her mind raced. Maya, the quiet catalyst of this impossible reunion, sat in her chair, observing the two adults with a wisdom that belied her age. They talked, at first in stilted, cautious sentences. Arthur learned about David, not the common laborer he had dismissed, but a loving husband and devoted father who could build anything from a bookshelf to a fairy castle in the backyard. He learned about the accident, the details of which were a fresh wound for Sarah to recount. He listened, for the first time in his life, without interrupting, without judging, without formulating a counter-argument. He simply absorbed the reality of the life his daughter had lived without him, and the weight of his regret grew with every word. His gaze kept returning to Maya's chair. The Trailblazer 5000. He saw the rugged functionality of it, the cleverness of the hand-cranked gear system, the raw, unpolished beauty of the welds. As a man who had built an empire on manufacturing and innovation, he recognized genius when he saw it. This was not just a wheelchair. It was a masterpiece of pragmatic design and empathetic engineering. This chair, Arthur said, turning his attention to Maya, the man in the video, the mechanic, he built this for you? Leo, Maya said, her face lighting up. He's my friend. He's the best fixer in the whole world. A new kind of determination began to form in Arthur's mind. His grief and regret were vast and overwhelming, but they were passive emotions. He was a man of action. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't bring back the husband his daughter had loved, but he could do something. His entire life had been about solving problems, usually with money. It was the only tool he truly knew how to wield. He would find this mechanic, this Leo, and he would repay him. He would write a check so large it would change the man's life, a grand gesture to prove he was here to make things right. The next morning, after a tense but tearful breakfast with Sarah and Maya, Arthur asked for directions to Leo's garage. Sarah was wary. Leo's, private, she warned. He doesn't like a fuss. What he didn't do it for money. I understand, Arthur said, though in his heart he didn't. Everything to him had a price. He simply intended to pay a premium. He found the garage easily. It looked exactly as it had in the video, a humble, hard-working structure that seemed to belong to a different era. He stepped out of his anonymous rental sedan, his expensive Italian loafers looking absurd on the oil-stained pavement. He straightened his suit jacket, his corporate armor, and walked inside. Leo was bent over the engine of an old farm truck, his back to the door. The familiar sounds of metal on metal filled the space. He didn't seem to notice Arthur's arrival. Leo? Arthur said, his voice echoing in the large space. Leo straightened up slowly and turned. He saw the tall, imposing figure in the expensive suit, and his face settled into its usual guarded, neutral expression. He recognized him from photos Sarah had shown him the night before, after the impossible had happened. He wiped his hands on a rag, a reflexive gesture of a man preparing for something unpleasant. I'm Arthur Thompson, Arthur said, extending a hand. Leo looked at the offered hand, then at his own grease-stained fingers, and gave a short, non-committal nod instead of shaking it. I know. The rebuff, however slight, threw Arthur off balance. He was used to people fawning over him, eager to make a connection. I came to thank you, Arthur said, recovering. For what you did for my granddaughter, for Maya. He paused, expecting some kind of response. But Leo just watched him, his eyes patient and unreadable. It was an incredible thing, Arthur continued, feeling increasingly awkward. A truly remarkable piece of engineering. I've come to compensate you for it. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a leather checkbook and a gold pen. He clicked the pen open. Name your price. Whatever it is, I'll double it. Your time, the materials, your ingenuity deserves to be rewarded. He held the pen poised over the blank check, ready to write a number with enough zeros to solve any problem. This was his territory. This was how he fixed things. Leo looked at the checkbook, then at the gold pen, and then his gaze met Arthur's. He didn't look angry or impressed. He just looked calm. It wasn't for sale, Leo said, his voice quiet but firm. Arthur blinked. I'm not trying to buy it. I'm trying to pay you for the one you already built. As a gesture of gratitude. I know, Leo said. He turned away and picked up a wrench from his workbench, inspecting it as if it held a deep fascination. It was a gift. For Maya. You don't pay for gifts. This simple, irrefutable logic completely dismantled Arthur's worldview. He had spent his entire adult life operating under the principle that everything had a quantifiable value. Time was money. Innovation was an asset. Kindness was a transaction that created social capital. But this quiet mechanic, standing in a dusty garage with oil-stained hands, was operating on a different system entirely, one whose currency Arthur didn't understand. But your time, Arthur stammered, feeling his power and certainty evaporate in the face of this quiet integrity. The parts. You should be compensated. It's only right. Leo put the wrench down and turned back to face him fully. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It wasn't anger, but something more profound. Do you have children, Mr. Thompson? Leo asked. The question was so unexpected it felt like a punch. I have a daughter, Arthur said, the words catching in his throat. When you do something for your child, Leo continued, his voice still soft, when you try to make their world a little better, do you send them a bill afterwards? The question hung in the air between them, devastating in its simplicity. Arthur had no answer. He had never done anything for his child without expecting something in return. Obedience, loyalty, a reflection of his own ambition. He had tried to buy her love, and when that failed, he had tried to punish her for not selling it. He looked at Leo, truly seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just a small-town mechanic. He was a man of profound moral clarity, a man whose wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion around Leo's eyes and understood that the chair hadn't been built from just scrap metal. It had been built from sleepless nights and a deep, personal sacrifice that money could never repay. It would be an insult to even try. Slowly, Arthur lowered the checkbook and clicked the pen shut. He slipped them back into his pocket, the gesture a clear signal of surrender. He had come here to solve a problem with his power, and instead, his power had been rendered meaningless. He stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the garage settling around them. An idea began to form in his mind, a different kind of idea, one not born from a desire to pay off a debt, but from a spark of genuine inspiration. It was an idea that spoke Leo's language, the language of building, of fixing, of purpose. You're right, Arthur said. His voice changed, humbled. You're absolutely right. I can't pay you for what you did. He paused, looking around the garage, at the organized chaos, the evidence of a brilliant mind at work. But you said it yourself. You saw a problem, and you fixed it. How many other kids are there like Maya? Stuck in chairs that don't work, unable to explore their own backyards. Leo remained silent, but his eyes sharpened. Arthur had his full attention. What if you could fix that problem for all of them? Arthur continued, his own voice now filled with a new, different kind of energy. It wasn't the energy of a corporate raider. It was the energy of a creator. I'm not offering to buy one chair, Leo. I'm offering to fund a future, a new venture, right here in Harmony Creek. A workshop, a design studio. The best tools, the best materials. You would be the head of design and innovation. We could create a whole line of these trailblazers, make them affordable, change thousands of lives. He wasn't offering a handout. He was offering a partnership. He was offering Leo a bigger garage, a bigger set of problems to solve. He was offering him a purpose on a scale he had never imagined. Leo stared at him, his mind racing. He thought of Lena and their shared dreams sketched in a dusty notebook. He thought of Maya's triumphant laughter as she conquered the lawn. He imagined other children, other laughter, other reclaimed worlds. Arthur saw the flicker of possibility in the mechanic's eyes. We could name it after her, he added softly, after the inspiration. We could call it Maya Mobility. The name settled in the space between them, filled with hope and the promise of a future built not just from steel and wire, but from the immeasurable value of a selfless heart. 1 year later, on the edge of Harmony Creek, where the old abandoned cannery once stood crumbling, a new building gleamed in the afternoon sun. It wasn't a towering skyscraper of glass and steel, but a low-slung modern structure of warm wood, brushed metal, and wide, welcoming windows. A steady, productive hum emanated from within. Above the entrance, bold, clean letters spelled out a name that had become a symbol of the town's rebirth: Maya Mobility. The venture had been a transfusion for the tired old town. It had brought jobs, investment, and a sense of pride that had been dormant for decades. The once empty diner was now full at lunchtime with engineers and technicians, and a new coffee shop had opened on Main Street. Harmony Creek was no longer a place people were from. It was becoming a place they wanted to be. Inside the main design studio, light streamed through a massive skylight, illuminating a space that was part high-tech workshop, part creative playground. And at its center stood Leo. He was no longer the reclusive, haunted mechanic. The perpetual worry between his brows had been replaced by a look of focused intensity. He wore a simple, dark blue polo shirt with the company logo on it, but the faint scent of machine oil still clung to him like a badge of honor. He was leaner, more confident, his shoulders no longer hunched against the weight of his past. He was standing on a small, elevated stage, addressing a crowd of employees, townspeople, and journalists who had gathered for the company's official launch. "A machine is only as good as its purpose," Leo said, his voice steady and clear, amplified by a microphone. He was still a man of few words, but now, when he spoke, people listened. "Our purpose isn't just to build chairs. It's to build possibilities. It's to remove barriers. It's to make sure that no child ever feels stuck on the wrong side of a curb." In the front row, a small group sat watching him with rapt attention. Sarah, looking relaxed and radiant, her face free from the constant strain of financial worry, sat next to her father. Arthur Thompson was not the corporate titan of a year ago. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple sports coat. The granite mask was gone too, replaced by the open, emotional face of a proud grandfather. His arm rested on the back of his daughter's chair, a casual, comfortable gesture that spoke volumes about the healing that had taken place. And beside him, in the seat of honor, was Maya. She was the heart of this entire enterprise, a fact she seemed both wonderfully aware of and completely unfazed by. She was the company's chief product tester and head of inspiration, a title she had invented herself. Her role was to dream, to push the limits, and to ask the one question that drove their innovation: but can it go there? On a large, brightly lit platform in the center of the showroom stood the reason they were all here: the MM1, the first official production model from Maya Mobility. It was a beautiful machine, a direct descendant of Leo's original prototype. It was sleeker, lighter, with a dozen small improvements suggested by its chief tester, but it retained the rugged, go-anywhere spirit of its ancestor. But the MM1 wasn't the true star of the show. To the side of the stage, encased in a simple but elegant glass display case and illuminated by a single, soft spotlight, stood the original chair. The Trailblazer 5000. Its unpainted aluminum frame was scuffed and scratched from a year of adventures. A small dried wildflower was tucked into a crevice near the seat, put there by Maya months ago. It was raw, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. It wasn't just a prototype, it was a testament. It was a symbol of how a single, quiet act of kindness, forged from scrap metal and a broken heart, could spark a revolution. Leo finished his short speech, and the room erupted in applause. He stepped down from the stage and walked directly to his front row audience. Arthur stood up and clasped a hand on Leo's shoulder, a gesture of deep respect and friendship. Sarah gave him a hug, whispering a thank you that encompassed more than just the day's event. Then Leo knelt down beside Maya. "What do you think, boss?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Ready to design the MM2? Maya's eyes sparkled. "I was thinking, what about one that can go underwater?" Leo laughed. A full, easy sound that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "We'll get right on it." Later, as the event wound down, the four of them, Leo, Maya, Sarah, and Arthur, found themselves standing together beside the glass case, looking at the original chair. They were a strange and unlikely quartet: the quiet mechanic, the fearless girl, the resilient mother, and the repentant tycoon. They were not a family bound by blood, but one forged in the fires of grief, forgiveness, and shared purpose. Arthur looked at the chair, then at the three people beside him. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I spent my whole life building an empire of things, It took me 60 years to realize that the only things worth building are the ones that connect us to each other. Sarah slipped her hand into his, her grip firm and loving. Maya looked up at Leo. "You didn't just fix my chair, Leo," she said with the simple clarity that was her gift. "You fixed my family." Leo looked at the reflection of their four faces in the glass, superimposed over the image of the chair that had started it all. He thought of his sister, Lena, and the promise he had made her as a boy. He hadn't just kept it, he had magnified it. Her dream, once confined to the pages of a dusty notebook, was now going to travel the world, bringing freedom and laughter to thousands of children. The ghost in his garage was finally at peace, her memory transformed from a source of pain into a legacy of hope. They stood there together, a tableau of second chances, looking at the proof that the greatest things are never built by hands alone. They are built by hearts that are brave enough to see a problem and kind enough to fix it. The story of Maya Mobility didn't end there. It was just the beginning. It serves as a powerful reminder that we all have a garage, a set of tools, and a unique gift to offer the world. Sometimes, the most complex problems don't require a corporate strategy or a mountain of wealth, but simply the courage to fix what is broken right in front of us. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Upstory. We believe that stories like this are more important than ever. If this story touched your heart, please help us share it by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. And for our question today, who in your life has been a Leo to you? Who saw a problem and offered a gift of kindness when you needed it most? Share your stories in the comments below. We read every single one, because your stories inspire us, and they remind us that in a world full of noise, kindness is the clearest signal of all. We'll see you next time.